Well, I was just telling Colin before the rest of you got on that my kiddos are all coming later today. One of them was supposed to be arriving like right now, but his second flight got canceled last night. Now he's going through Dallas, a different airline. The storm left airplanes and personnel in locations they were not supposed to be in. Everything's fine now, but the airlines are having some trouble. So, hey, Dwayne, welcome. Jerry, nice to see you.
Hello.
Today's topic is on a new feature in Access called VBA Signing. In the PDF that I posted on the internet, on the Access Lunchtime website, I did post a couple links at the last page of that. One of those, actually there's two links to both a post and a video that Colin Riddington has done about this subject. His approach was just a little bit different than what I'm going to do today. So I think even viewing both would have some benefit to you. In particular, he talks a bit about running code that's not signed or run from a trusted location and how it can take significantly longer to run that code due to Microsoft's anti-malware, I didn't pronounce that right, scan interface that runs each time code is used. So that's pretty interesting. Or if you're concerned about the speed of your code, you might want to take a close look at that part. And then he does detail and give some good pictures as well as steps you through some stuff. So first of all, what is VBA signing? Other Office products call this macro signing, but that's not what it's called in Access. Why do they do that? Why do they call it macro signing? Well, most people are most familiar with the name macro as opposed to VBA. In fact, in the other products, for example, Excel, anytime you record a macro, it actually gets auto-converted to VBA code. Access is the only product that has what you and I know as the macro interface, where you get like a block kind of interface that you can use to define and to modify different types of events and actions in a macro editor. In Access, macros themselves, if they're embedded into forms or designed as separate macros, are actually not required to be signed unless you use unsafe actions. That's the actions that are in the show all actions area. And those do have to be signed. But all VBA code does have to be signed. What are we talking about here? First of all, let's take a look at where you set this. And setting this is done in the Trust Center. So on the left side here, where the macro settings is highlighted in green, that's what you see in Excel. And on the right side, where the macro settings is highlighted in red, that's what you see in Access. First of all, notice the 4 different options. You can disable VBA macros totally without notification. You can disable all macros with notification. If you're familiar with that setting, which is actually the default setting that Access uses, in the past, you've gotten like a little enable button that happens at least the first time that you open it to warn you that there's macros in there and to see whether or not you want to go ahead and run those or not. You can disable all macros except the digitally signed macros. And that is something that is new to Access, to be able to do that and then to sign macros. Although we actually used to be able to do that. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then finally, there's a 4th option to enable all macros, and that's not the recommended one. But in both cases here, no matter if it's called disable VBA macros or disable all macros, only the VBA is required to be signed, or the macros that have the unsafe actions. Excel only has VBA, so that's why the word VBA is in there. I think the Access team thought that that would be confusing to have in Access, so they did not add that word. So let me show you this in real life here. So I'm opening up a database here, and we're going to see these settings on the File Options under Trust Center settings, and then you go to the macro settings. So here are the 4 options. And just to kind of demo a couple things for you here, I have this selection, this third selection selected here. And for trusted locations, this is the default one, and then this is another one that I have. But I am actually running this code here from a different directory. I'm running it from this Documents, Presentations, Access Lunchtime directory. So I am not in a trusted location. If I was in a trusted location, then it would not have to be signed. But because I'm not, if I have any VBA in here or macros with unsafe actions, then when I opened this up, I would have gotten a warning. In this case, it only has a table and a form. There are no macros in here except for one embedded macro. And that embedded macro here is got something very simple. It tests the field, and if it's field 1 is null, it changes the background color to a red. This is where the show all actions, if you use one of the actions in the show all actions, that's what's considered the unsafe macro action. So just to show you running this form, I've got a form. When I go to the second one, this is blank, so it turns red. So it used that macro, it ran it. This is not signed, and yet still it runs. By contrast here, I'm going to open another one, and this one, I did the same thing, that very same macro that was in that form. I just used the convert forms macros to Visual Basic. So now it's an event procedure here that looks like this. It's very simple. But if I try to run this, I'll even put like a stop here. If I try to run this, you will see that this doesn't highlight. It doesn't go to the code. This is not running. Now, it's not telling me it's not running. This is an improvement that I would like to see. I would like to see some kind of notification that it is not running my macros here. But there's no notification. But indeed, because I am not in a trusted location and I have my setting set to only run macros that are signed, this is not running. So let's then go to this next one, which has the code as signed. And in this case, when I run it and go to the second one, there it's red because the code is running because I've actually signed the code. And we're going to learn more today about how to go about doing that, but I wanted to demo a little bit of how it operated here. So you might ask yourself, especially if you've used Access for a while, haven't we already been able to do this? The older MDB format back, I believe it was prior to 2010, had a similar capability, but it wasn't the new SHA 256 format. So while it had the ability, once the code signing certificates got to be more modern and used the SHA 256 format to sign the code, Access could not use those newer certificates. You could do like homegrown certificates, but you couldn't use purchased code certificates. And if you notice here in the current channel preview, it talks about this new update. So right now, this is available in the current channel preview or in the beta version. And soon it will be released to the current channel of Office 365. And it's the ability to not only sign your code with a digital signature, but also to use one that is in the new SHA 256 format. So why should we be signing our code? There's a trust center setting to only run the sign code, which I just showed you. That was that third option. And the new security-based guidelines for Microsoft 365 apps now recommends turning that option on. So what does that mean for you as a developer? If you have clients and they're following Microsoft 365 apps recommended security guidelines, they may very well be setting that setting. And so you need to be prepared to deal with it. What are we doing right now? What are our workarounds that we're using because we haven't been able to sign code in case some people are setting that? A workaround that we've been using is to add the location of wherever we're putting our database to our trusted locations. And I know that I do that in a lot of my clients. If they can't run the macros, that's the first step I take with them. However, some companies' group policies prevent you adding trusted locations. So signing the macros, signing the VBA allows you to run in a non-trusted location with the setting disable all macros except digitally signed macros turned on. And I hope you don't think that I'm going through this too slowly or in too many different ways, but I personally found the whole subject just a little confusing, both the naming and what can I do when and why would I need to do this? So that's why I've laid things out like this. So again, it's available right now in the beta channel or the current channel preview. It's soon to be available in the current channel. And in the meantime, if you want to play with it, you could consider joining Office Insider. There's a second link here to enable business users to allow users to join these channels because the business can prevent you from joining the Insiders channel if they have you set up as such. Okay, so these are the steps to actually go in and add a certificate. I've laid these out. I'm going to go through these, so I'm not going to sit here and read this, but so that you have this available to you, I wanted to make sure to put it in the presentation here. Actually, I'm going to go to one without a certificate here already. So this one has code. It's not signed. This is the same one here where we tested and it didn't work, right? We've got the code here, but we haven't enabled the signature here. So to sign something, you go to Database Tools, Visual Basic, or open your IDE window. And then you go to your code and use the tools and the digital signature. So if you have something signed, then it will show up here at the top as being signed. Because it says no certificate, this is not signed. And then you can sign it with the last certificate that you used. You can choose the certificate. You can go to more choices and see what else you have. And then you select OK. And after you've done that, if you've done it correctly, when you go to digital certificate, it will show that it is signed up at the top. Now, one word of warning. If you don't have this feature yet, if you are on Access 2019, or if you're on 365 and you're on current channel, or the whatever the other one is, semi-annual, the one that gets the later updates, you are going to see all of the same stuff. But when you select a certificate and you hit OK, you're actually going to get an error. And that error is going to say something like, Microsoft Access cannot save the digital signature at this time. So it'll look like it's going to work, but you'll get that error instead. And then if you go back and you repeat and go to Tools, Digital Signature, it will not have a signature listed at the top because it doesn't actually save and work. The other thing to note here is that to make sure you close out your project after you've added the signature without making any changes to code, because any changes you make to code invalidates your certificate. If you're working on a project and you're going to be making changes and that kind of thing, and then you're going to be distributing it, the very last thing you want to do when everything is done and you've saved your project once is to sign it at the very end, because once you sign it, you don't want it to save any further or no other changes save, because then you'll just invalidate it.
Maria?
Yeah.
Can I just say, because I kept getting it wrong when I first tried this, not only don't make any code changes after signing the project, don't click the save button after doing it, because if you click the save button, it automatically invalidates the signature, even if you've not done anything at all.
Good, very good point. So even if you haven't actually made a change, hitting the save icon in the VBA window will invalidate it.
Shouldn't you compile first also?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yep. I would make and test all of your changes. Testing involves compiling because it compiles it, but you should always actually make sure your code compiles before you start testing it. Even if you want to add a comment or anything like that, then hit the save button, then apply your signature, and then X out of VBA window. So here are some steps to create a test certificate. The directions I have here apply to Windows 10 or after. So if you've got an older version of Windows, it might be slightly different than this. It might probably similar, it's just in a different directory. But you want to go to either this first directory, or if you can't find it in that, it depends upon how the setup on your computer is done. Then you should find the tool in the second directory. You can use a tool called Self-Cert, EXE. There's a Create Digital Certificate box, and you put in your name, put a descriptive name, and then click OK a couple times here. And this is great for playing around with it. If you do this, you can essentially sign code and treat it and test these things without purchasing a signature from a separate signing authority. But if you then give that database to someone else, that self-cert is not good for them. So if you want to sign code and then pass it on to others, like if you have a download site like Colin does, or if that's how you want to distribute to your clients, you do need to have a purchased certificate. I purchased one for, I think, a 3-year period. It wasn't terribly expensive. It was a few $100s. It did take some time. There's like a verification process that they have to go through, and it depends upon what agency you purchase through, but you just Google VBA code signing certificates and you'll get a list of vendors that provide that type of thing. And again, you can do a self-cert for free for your own testing, but you can't distribute those. Then the first time you do this and you open up something that you have signed, you're still going to get a security warning. And I want to demo that and how to do this. And again, the directions are here, and I'll talk through these, but the reason they're here is not for me to just read through this, but for me to show you those. So first of all, I already had this open, didn't I? This one's signed, and I'm not going to get it this first time because I've already trusted me. Yeah, it's not showing because I'm already a trusted publisher. So let me remove myself from trusted publisher. While I'm doing that, I'll show you that area. In order to remove trusted publishers, you actually have to be signed into Access as an admin. So, or with admin privileges. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click on the Access icon and choose More, Run as Administrator. And then I'm going to go here to File Options, Trust Center Settings. And we talked here, but this is where our macro settings were. The third option is the one that I have selected that requires me to only be running digitally signed macros unless it's in a trusted location. We showed that the presentation directory that I'm running this from is not in my trusted locations. And here we have trusted publishers. So this is the certificate that I use as an administrator or running as administrative privileges. I can remove that. And then when I open this, I get this message, okay? And so then these are the steps here to trust the publisher. And once you trust a publisher, you only have to trust it once. So you will need to instruct your clients on how to do this for you. If you say, I had a client and I had 3 different applications, once they went through this and they trusted my certificate once, they wouldn't have to do that again for the other applications. It's per publisher, per signing authority. So what you want to do, instead of clicking on Enable Content, you actually want to click on the link to the left of it. And then in the security warning here, you want to click on the little drop down and choose Advanced Options. And here you get a pop-up and it talks about the digital certificate. If you have that setting applied where you need to trust things, then you will have this third option here, or rather, if it has digitally signed code in it, the database, then you will have this third option to trust all documents from this publisher. If you opened this and it did not have that in, then you wouldn't see this third option. So you just click that and click OK. Then that goes away. You're actually, if you take a look, you're then added to the trusted publishers. And you don't have to be in admin mode to do this. You just have to be in admin mode to remove it. So if you see here, I can't remove because I'm not in admin mode right now. And then if I close it and I reopen it, I don't get the warning. And here's my form. And the code is now working. Okay, yep. If that option isn't available, that means the code is not signed. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what invalidates the code signature. So if you go in and if you modify the code, if I went into this and I modified something in here, even if all I do is add a comment, hello. Or like I believe Colin said, if you just hit the save button, that is going to invalidate this code signature. Besides that, if you modify a macro that has unsafe actions in it, if you modify or add an action query, it also invalidates it. So this is important. If you modify a pass-through query, even if it's a select query, I found that it also invalidates the signature. One point I just wanted to bring up here. In Colin's article, he mentions a very odd message wording that you get when you open up a database that has been invalidated. And I think that they have fixed that now. We're still in the preview phase of this new feature. And so Microsoft has been listening to a few of us that have been giving them some feedback on what looks right and what doesn't, and what's working and what's not. So I think that they have corrected that, because I found that the message that you get when it's been invalidated looks a lot nicer now. So let's just take a quick look here at what happens and what it does look like. So I'm going to close the VBA window without saving. I'm going to close the form. And as I do this, watch down here on the left briefly, and you're going to see a little status message. It's so quick. It's easy to miss it. So do I want to save changes? Because I did make a change. I added a comment to it. Yes, and I don't know, I didn't see it, but there's a message that pops up here very briefly saying that this has been invalidated. Fortunately, it also happens when you close the database. And it said the same thing as this top line. Modifications to the database or project have invalidated the associated digital signature. It may require you to make a trust decision the next time you open the database or project. So if you were working on this as a developer and you were getting ready to send this to someone, this would be your warning. Oops, don't forget to go back and sign the code. If you are some user and you just are playing around in Access and creating update queries or delete queries or something like that, then you are going to suddenly be in trouble, and you're going to realize that you're in trouble. Philip has a question. Is it possible for an administrator of an organization to trust a certain publisher for all users in an active domain or in a Microsoft 365 tenant, instead of each user having to trust the publisher? I'll have to be honest, Philip, I don't know how to do that because I'm not focused or aware of how to go about administrating a large tenant, but I am almost positive they can. I know one of my clients has done that with the trusted locations, so I'm sure that there's a way for them to push out some kind of group policy for Office that trusts specific publishers. They can probably also, prevent your ability to trust your own publisher or something like that. So you might encounter that. What doesn't affect the signature? I said on the screen before this that you cannot modify or create an action query. No update, no, let's just go through what an update action query is. So the action query would be, if you're trying to go into your query, select is not. All of these others, well, crosstab is not either, but make tab, append, update, delete, those are all action queries. The select is not, and the crosstab are not. If you're running an action query, that's fine. If you have a database and you have a delete query someplace and you've created it and something that you do runs that, that's fine. You just can't modify an action query. So if you're used to in code doing something like having a base delete query and modifying it in code to add a where clause or change the where clause and then run it, that's going to invalidate the signature. You can, however, get around that by doing things like using connection objects and record sets and building your SQL and running from that interface without actually modifying the query itself. Also, you can run a pass-through query. You just can't modify the pass-through query. And I'm going to repeat because I think it's a fine distinction. In Access, an access query that's not a pass-through query, if you had a select query, you could use code to modify, say, the where clause on a select query, and that should be allowed. That should not invalidate the signature. But if you've got a pass-through query, the reality is Access doesn't know what that pass-through query is. It just knows it's text. So it doesn't know if it's an action query or not. Anytime I tried to even modify a pass-through select query, it invalidated. So, and again, I guess I said that already in this third line, that you can modify a non-pass-through select query and it doesn't affect the signature. All right, so here are the links. These are the two links at the bottom to Colin's write-up. The first one's a write-up, and it steps you through the whole process. The second one, there's actually a link to it towards the end of the article that has a brief YouTube. I'm thinking I don't remember exactly. Maybe Colin can clarify or he recalls. I'm thinking it's about 25 minutes long. So not as long as today's webinar, but it steps you through the process of signing it in case you get stuck. The illustrations either here or in his article are not enough for you. That's also a good one to reference. And then there's a couple other links. Here is a description of the new ability. And this one is a little bit about digitally signing your macro project. It's an older article, and so the other non-Access products like Word and Excel have been able to digitally sign with this newer signature algorithm for some time. Access is a little bit late to the game in this. Again, they had this feature back 2010 or earlier and with the MDBs, but it was an older technology and they never upgraded it. So, and there is a lot to think about. In Excel or Word, it's pretty simple. You've got VBA code, and if you modify it, you break it. There's no action queries. There's no things like that. But Access is a database. And, the purpose of doing something like this is so that you can deliver a product that has been tested and that and your users know is safe. Once somebody goes and tries to modify it, it might not be safe anymore. So you can do things like distribute an ACCDE, for example. Then they can't modify your VBA code because it's an executable. So that's protection. But a user can still go in and create a make table query and add new tables. And maybe they could use a delete query to delete all the records in your database, or, things that might be considered harmful that you didn't authorize. So that's the purpose of this kind of effort and just making things more secure. But we might have to change a little bit about the way we go about doing things. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing here and open it up for questions. I'm going to post this link again because it looks like we got quite a few more people since I started. So if you have specific questions, go ahead and feel free to ask, to put in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can put your question in the chat.
Thanks.
Nothing?
Being as everyone's being silent, I'll try and speak, Maria. A couple of things. First of all, I just discovered while this was going on that the link to my website article is a second page and the link was wrong. I've just fixed that. So if anyone has looked at it and couldn't get to the second page, you now can. As you said, in my article, I focused significantly on the speed difference for trusting a project in a non-trusted location. On the test application I use, it was about 20 times faster running a signed project in a non-trusted location than just clicking the enable content. And that's because of, as you said, the anti-malware scan interface, or AMPSI, which you'd think would run just the first time you run some code, but it doesn't. It runs every time you run some code. And so it slows down every single occasion that you do it unless you sign the project. So that's a significant reason for doing it. But lastly, I've got the flow here. If you sign a project and then place it in a trusted location, the trusted location rules apply rather than the project signing rules. Therefore, that means that somebody could move your application, if they're allowed to, into a trusted location and could then change delete queries and other action queries and so on. So you don't want to allow the two different processes to be done together, both of them at the same time. I hope that made sense.
All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I encourage you to start looking into it. I know Microsoft has been kind of mandated, actually, I think in some cases by the federal government in the U.S. to do a lot of work on security this year. And I'm sure that we're trying to stop hackers, we're trying to stop malicious intent, and they've been a partner with them to try to help. And I think that this and also probably the anti-malware checking that does slow down things is part of those efforts that you're seeing. Do you have a question, Margaret?
Yeah, I did, and I forgot it when I was listening to you. It made me forget the question, so I was going to. Oh, I know what it is. So is there a way that we can, this is my first time on this thing, and I want to thank you for the obviously large amount of work that went into it. Is there a way to get a copy of this video?
So what we do is, I don't know if you've visited AccessUserGroups.org before, but there are several different, I want to say 5-ish different chapters, and we each tend to have a webinar about once a month. It's all at different times, time zones, locations, different speaker topics, and some groups post their recordings of the webinar earlier than others. For my group, I rely on a wonderful lady called Crystal, and she takes the raw recording and makes it into something presentable on YouTube. So it is on YouTube. Let me post the channel link here. This recording should be up on YouTube shortly before next month's presentation. And for this group, which is called Lunchtime, we meet the last Tuesday. Sometimes it's the fourth Tuesday, sometimes it's the fifth Tuesday. The last Tuesday of every month at 12 p.m. Central Time. And while we're on next month's topic, we have here Colin Riddington, who is going to be presenting next month's topic. Colin, do you want to give a brief overview of what you're going to talk about next month?
Thanks. Next month it will be me, and I'm going to be doing two topics. The first one of which will be following on from, I think it was October or September's meeting on text-to-speech, where David Neely and Alessandro Grimaldi both did a section on that. I'm going to be doing my Translate and Speak application, which is taking the process a stage further. So hopefully people will find that interesting. And in the second half of the meeting, I may, if I've finished it by then, do an application application translator item, which is designed to change the captions and the things like message box text and so on to whichever language you like from your starting language. And although it relies on the accuracy of Google Translate, it will still get you a long way to making your projects acceptable in another language. It still needs a human to do the last checking, of course. If that's not ready, then I may well show my Access version checker, which Carl Donnerbauer recently mentioned in his new blog. So I think that's it. And can I just mention for Margaret's benefit that if she hasn't seen it, my video on project signing, which takes a different tack to Maria's, covers slightly different areas. It might be worth watching. I'll put the link to that up in the chat.
Thanks. Sounds good. Yeah, especially if this is interesting and you want to start playing with it right away. I did post a link here to the PDF of the presentation with some of it that you can get to the PDF right now. But if you want to watch a little bit more about it and don't want to wait 3 weeks for this recording to come out, do take a look at Colin's. And even if you're going to view that anyway, it's a semi-complicated topic, actually. And to have two different approaches on it, I think is a wise idea. You might grasp part of it that blows over your head or whatever the first time. So I'm just going to open up the floor. And I do have to end us at 1:00 today. Sometimes we run over and have a glorious discussion, but I have kiddos coming into town shortly for our belated Christmas celebration.
Marie, can I come back in once more, and hopefully the last time? Trusted publisher bit, that was the thing that I found most easy to get wrong, because I was so used to clicking on the enable content button. If you click on that, it's almost impossible to get back to being able to trust all content from this publisher again. So you want to strongly avoid doing the enable content button, click on the text. If you make a mistake, the only way I found to actually get back to that position was to move the item to a different untrusted location. I think I moved it to a trusted location and then back to a different untrusted one. And then I got the security banner again. So take care on that section. It's easy to get it wrong. And if you distribute your apps without a ribbon, then your clients will have a major problem trusting you for the first time. Something I've asked Microsoft to find a better solution for.
I'd like to make 2 comments on that. First of all, I believe when I was experimenting with that, I instantly clicked the enable button. That was my first impulse, right? Because that's what we've been doing. We do it in Excel. But I think that I just made a copy of it in the same directory and it was okay. And then I got the trust option again. All I did is make a copy of the database. So I think it was that simple.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then the second comment is I would love to see a way, maybe on the info area, for you to see, does this contain something like macros or VBA that requires it to be signed, and is it signed? I'd love to see those 2 pieces of information available on that info area so that your everyday user that doesn't have any idea how to go into your VBA code, and maybe you can't go into your VBA code if it's an ACCDE, that's the really only way to see right now whether or not a digital signature is applied to it or not.
Really appreciate you taking this on and explaining this, because I was not at all aware of this. And your explanation was very clear and very helpful.
Thank you. I know that I myself heard it from the Microsoft team, and I had to hear it like 3 different ways before it really sank in. I just was having some trouble following it. So I figure if I do, then other people might as well. So that's another reason it's, I think, good to have both Colin's take on this and my take on it, because they kind of approach it just a little differently. Yeah, Dwayne, I don't know if you've toured the lake lately, but Dwayne lives near where I am, and I've got an entire village of ice fishermen out here, out my window. And they've even got trucks on the lake already. It's way early for that kind of action out there. So.
It's pretty thick. I expect my brother and good friend will be out there on Minnetonka. So yeah.
I think the weather's supposed to keep easing up this week. So
yes, I hope so. We're due.
I have people from the South visiting soon. So some of them get a little shell-shocked in the temperatures that we have here in the winter.
Yeah, we have a relative coming in tomorrow from Denmark, so it'll be nice that we might see above freezing temperatures.
Yes, yep.
For the first time in a couple of weeks.
Okay, well, if no one else has anything else, I think we'll just go ahead and end a few minutes early. Thank you all for joining us.
Have a good New Year, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
New Year.
See you in the new year.